Right. Good evening, members and officers of the Council, and no members of the public, good, and welcome to the meeting of the Standards Committee. Usual housekeeping rules: if the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to the right of me or behind me. Please do not use the lifts and assemble in the Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return. Does anybody intend to film the meeting? Good. No members of the public here, we can skip that. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be broadcast on the Council's YouTube. Could everybody please ensure their mobile phones are turned off and they're not used to make calls in the chamber while this meeting is in progress? And does any member wish to speak under Council Rule Procedure 20.1? No? Good. Before we go into agenda item 1, I'd like to introduce the new monitoring officer, Ingrid Brown, and say welcome to you to our first Standards Committee meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really happy to be here, really happy to be in Thanet, and look forward to working with you all. Just by way of a bit of background, I'm in week 4 of my post here, so just still really getting to know people. And prior to that, I was Deputy Monitoring Officer and Head of Legal at BCP, a big unitary authority. So yeah, really happy to be here, and I've been made very welcome. And as I said, really look forward to working with you all on standards. I'm passionate about standards and sat on a standards committee for all the time that I was on BCP, or was the legal advisor to standards. So sorry, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ingrid. Right, agenda item 1, any apologies for absence? We've received one from Michael Clark. Are there any others? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting, I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November 2022 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Crittenden. Unless anyone's got any objections to the minutes, I'll take them as agreed. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Good. I'll now invite Mr. Hughes to open the comments on agenda item 4.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is looking at our key decision thresholds. So as part of the review of the Independent Monitoring Officer, it was recommended, as it says at 1.1, to review the scheme of delegations to ensure that it's clear and easy to understand and includes appropriate conditions, bless you, thereby defining, includes appropriate conditions requiring engagement of councillors in strategic and high-risk decisions. So what we're doing is we had a report that went to general purposes, and that set what the officer scheme of delegations was. So this is doing the other end of the delegations system. So we are deciding what level at which we want to set the decision-making thresholds so that councillors, in this case cabinet, can look at the strategic and high-risk decisions. So we've got a current definition of our key decision, or what the council considers to be a key decision, which is outlined at paragraph 2.1. We've then looked at the main one is effectively anything over £250,000 expenditure, essentially. We've looked at the other councils in Kent, and you can see that 4 others set their threshold at £250,000. One is at 300, one is at 50, which is like, wow. And then others have got the fantastic word of significant, whatever that means. So by having a specific amount of money, there are no ambiguities about what the definition of significant would be, because obviously everybody's definition of that is slightly different. So looking at the paragraph 2.3, we've made some changes in red. You can highlight those. So what we've done is include a bit where it says where the approval has previously been received to incur expenditure, and also the acquisition, enhancement and disposal of land with a value of over £1 million. And then we've also got 2, which is where we have a contract rather than a purchase or a disposal of something over £250,000. These are where the council engages into a long contract over a period of years, and the lifetime value of that contract is over £750,000. So to sort of give a bit more clarity, we've included some examples in paragraph 4. So I'll just go through those. So example number 1, council wishes to buy some new refuse vehicles, cost £3.2 million. Is that more than 250? Yes, it is. Clearly, it's a key decision. Nice, simple, straightforward one. Example 2, council enters into a 4-year contract for a computer system. It's £105,000 per year, and it's 4 years, so that total cost would be £420,000. That's less than 750, so not a key decision. That's, again, hopefully pretty straightforward. And then example 3, so we create a land trust. We put £5 million in to buy up interesting properties around Thanet and do them up for the benefit of Thanet. So that setting up of that land trust and putting the £5 million in the budget, that's your key decision, because you're spending over £250,000. Now, when you're going and spending that £5 million on properties in Thanet, say, for example, somebody purchased a property of 650,000, which is not unheard of these days, that wouldn't be a key decision, because looking at 1A, we've already got permission to spend that money. There was already a key decision to spend that money, okay? However, if one of those properties that he wanted to buy was £1.5 million, that would be another key decision, because the council thinks that it's inappropriate for a single officer to spend £1 million, which is a huge amount of money. And to be honest, I think quite a lot of officers wouldn't be comfortable in spending that amount of money on their own. So essentially, what we're saying there is, if you're spending a big amount of money, but then dividing it up, if those smaller amounts are less than £1 million, then they're not key decisions. But if any of one of those individual ones is above £1 million, that's so significant that needs to be a key decision in its own right. Okay. So Constitutional Review Working Party looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and they've recommended, as per 2.3, so that's the paragraph with the red colours in, they didn't suggest any changes. That's pretty much it, really. We're looking for a recommendation on to full council on for the December the 7th meeting. So if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Councillor Crittenden.
Thank you. I'll start with the easy little bit. I didn't read this with a fine-tooth comb, but one typo did sort of leap off the page at me in 2.3.1. There should be no S on the end of involve. That's me being the proofreader coming out of me. But I did have some questions, genuine questions to follow from that. I wanted to know a bit more about the desktop research and the how you came to the conclusions. So you looked at it and you decided that 250,000 was the figure that you wanted to set. Was that the figure it was already at? And then, in that case, looking at the other authorities that you looked at, when did they last set their figures? So the 300,000 was that like set last year, but the 50,000 was set 10 years ago. How do they compare to those authorities' budgets compared to ours? So if our budget is worth twice the one that has a limit of 300, was that taken into account? Because I just feel that 300,000 in today's market is actually, 250,000 in today's market is actually touching on the low side. I wouldn't want to see it much higher, but I would have thought that 300 just kind of seems better. So I just wondered why you left it at 250 based, and where all of that desktop research all tied in a bit more detail.
So it was originally £250,000. We weren't actively looking to change it. We wanted to compare ourselves due to the IMO recommendation. We wanted to review to see where we were against other people. So looking at the other councils in Kent, 250 was the most popular one. It's difficult to tell with people's constitutions as to when they were last reviewed, because although they have a date that says last reviewed on the front, normally that's not necessarily the bit of the constitution that you're particularly looking at. With regards to budgets, these are all district councils that we haven't included Kent, we haven't included Medway in the list. So with regards to that, they are all pretty much of a similar budget. I wouldn't say they're not wildly different from a local district council budget within Kent. Yeah, we've taken this through Cabinet. Cabinet were happy with a £250,000 limit. We felt that, as I say, and corporate management team felt that the £250,000 was a fair amount that could get quite a lot done by officers, but retaining the ability for members to take the sort of the most important decisions. Is that helpful, or have I missed a bit out?
I'm coming back with an additional question, really, is when do you envisage reviewing the £250,000 next, if it's going to stay at that this time?
I'm quite happy to put a placeholder for a review in the future. It's not something that we've actively talked about with Cabinet or with CMT, but I'm happy to look in, I would say, certainly no less than 18 months' time. Because, as I say, these don't change all that often, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to put an 18-month, 2-year review in to come back and look at it again and do another desktop exercise.
So, may I? In that case, option 2, which was the CWRP recommendation, if we approve that, but could add, if others agree, plus a review, and I did say next year on my notes here, but in 2 years' time, of the financial definitions currently set at 250,000, because 250,000 is the price of a terrace house. It's, it sounds like a lot of money, but at the same time, in the current climate, it's becoming increasingly less. That's not a strange phrase, but yeah, thank you.
Councillor Crittenden, can I just add, I suppose the other thing with key decisions is the principle of transparency, and obviously the spending public money, making sure it's on the forward plan. So there's a heightened element of scrutiny. It's not just about decision making and kind of thwarting officers' decision-making powers, but it's really about that level of transparency that's felt, appropriate at that level.
Councillor Crittenden.
Just to say yes, thank you for that. I also understand that even if an officer wanted to spend less than the 250,000, like it was 249, they could actually request it to be put forward as a key decision anyway. So if they felt that there was a concern, so by putting a little bit on it, it wouldn't necessarily remove that safeguard, although it does require us to have obviously that trust with officers. I appreciate that, but thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the case, and of course there's the other part of the criteria, which is significant in 2 or more wards, and that's the other thing that needs to be considered.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question, just to say I really welcome the clarification. And I think that I'm happy with the figures, but I think the examples are very, very helpful and useful in understanding the small changes. So thank you.
I think it's safe to say as well that this figure has not been queried by Cabinet or by the Constitutional Review Working Party. I think everybody was happy with that value. Yeah, but don't worry about that. That's what you're here for. Has anybody else got any comments to make? In that case, could I please have a proposer and a seconder that the report is recommended to full council? Proposed by Councillor Bayford.
Sorry, can I just say I suggested that it was item 2, which was the CWRP recommendation plus a review in 2 years of the actual definition currently set at 250.
So you want, could you, so you want us to write in the review period rather than send it back for revision and amendment? Okay. Can somebody, yeah, I think so, yeah. Can somebody make a proposal then with that wording, what your wording is, please?
In that case, I'd like to propose option 2, CWRP recommendation, plus a review of the financial definition, currently set at 250,000, within 2 years of this meeting.
In that case, can I have a proposer for that, Councillor Bayford? And is there a seconder? Councillor Ovenden. Thank you. All agreed. Thank you very much. Can I ask Mr Hughes then to now comment on item agenda 5, the policy framework?
Thank you, Chairman. I won't go over the same reasons why we're doing it. It's about the independent monitoring officer, same as the previous one. This is the other half of what we like to say are the engagement of councillors in strategic and high risk decisions. So every council across the land has a what's called a policy framework, and that is a set of policies that the council considers so important that all councillors are allowed to have a vote on them at a full council meeting. So some of those things are things that by law have to be taken and decided upon by council, things like the local plan, for example. But also you have what's called local choice functions. And for those of you who have been here a long time, will have noticed me saying that Cabinet can only look at Cabinet things, Council can only look at Council things. Well, this is the exception to the rule. So if the Council, as a corporate body, feels something is so important that all councillors should have a view on it, we would include that item on the Council's policy framework. So you can see what the current policy framework is at 2.3, and the amended and suggested changes to the policy framework are outlined at 2.4. So we will be removing local transport plan, the housing investment programme and the food law enforcement service plan, and replacing those with mainly the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, the housing assistance policy and the HRA business plan. The local transport plan is a policy that forms part of the highways information for the council's local plan. As it's part of the council's local plan, is covered by point 2, which is all the plans and strategies that together comprise the local plan. So by definition, it's in there twice. So we've hiked that out. We don't need that anymore because that's covered under point 2. And we think that's probably a hangover from when Thanet was the Highways Authority, which gives an indication of how long it is since this was previously reviewed. And the housing investment programme, after speaking to the housing team, is not, again, something that really exists. It doesn't really mean anything from a housing point of view. So it's much more clear and transparent to include those 3 policies there at 4, 5 and 6, which are like the really key significant housing policies that the housing team feel as if councillors should all have a say in. And the food law enforcement service plan is, again, it's still required, but it's not required to be part of our council's framework. I think when it was originally created, there was a need for that to be part of it. Now it's still a council thing, but generally it's something that's unnecessary to be included in the forward plan, because in the policy framework, because when we say, is it one of the council's most important things, No, it isn't. Let's be honest. It is important in its own way, but it's not amongst the most important things the council does. What's also important to note, a couple of other things, is so this has been through our corporate management team, and it's also been through cabinet. So they're both happy with this, and this is not an exhaustive list. So if there are other things like the budget, for example, budget by law has to come to full council. Those things are things that are separately important, but they don't need to be part of our policy framework. So we did have a bit of a quick look round some of the other councils in Kent. Generally, it's pretty similar, really. There's no major issues. Some councils in Kent, Folkestone and I think Sevenoaks, I think are the two, have decided to include everything that goes to council. So when I said there were other things that council by law have to do, they've decided to include all of those things in their policy framework. So it runs to like a side and a half of A4, which is a bit unnecessary, really, I think. Don't tell them services teams that I said that, but yeah, it should really be focused on the things that are the most important things to the council. The very last thing that I'd like to say is that what you do need to bear in mind is if that you do wish to recommend something becomes part of our policy framework, if it's a cabinet function and what I call local choice, if you take that out and put it into the policy framework, it becomes a council function. So if you've got like a cabinet advisory group, for example, on a particular issue, and if you wanted to put that into the policy framework, it wouldn't be able to be a CAG anymore because there wouldn't be that cabinet scrutiny because it's a council function, if that makes sense. But other than that, happy to take any questions.
Councillor Austin?
I just wanted to point out that at the previous discussion about this, I had suggested that climate change be slotted in, and you explained, Nick, that actually wouldn't work in our favour, as it were, because it would mean that the process would be different, and I understood that, and I get that now. Thank you.
Councillor Crittenden?
Much shorter and simpler, this one. The current Food Law Enforcement Service Plan, when I tried to look at it, appeared to be out of date. It was it expired in 2020, April. It might be that I just didn't find a current one and I found an old one on the system. So I was just wondering if you could clarify that and say when it will be updated, because as you said, it is important, even if it doesn't need to be on here. Can I just clarify, if it's not on here, where does it go? I know that might sound like a stupid question, but what happens to it? Where does it hang instead?
What, specifically the Food Law Safety Plan? It sits in that sort of pot of things that have to go to council. So it's still it's a council function, and it sits with Penny Button's team, the Enforcement Safe Neighbourhoods people. Yeah, I don't actually know off the top of my head. It may be that you can't find it, because I know the last couple have been on pink papers. So that might be the reason why, because essentially it is the food safety plan. It's about telling the council how we're going to inspect properties, venues and premises, and you don't want to tell people how we're going to go about doing the searches and stuff in public forums. So that may be the reason, but I'll certainly can we make a note of that, and we'll certainly get... Yeah, the website, oh, absolutely, yeah, just to reflect that. Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other comments? Okay, in that case, could I please have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation that members are asked to consider the recommendation from the Constitutional Review Working Party and make a recommendation to full council regarding the content of the council's policy framework. Can I have a proposer? Proposed by Councillor Austin, seconded by Councillor Bayford. Are we all in favour and agreed? Excellent. Perhaps we can move on to item agenda 6. And Mr. Hughes, over to you again, please.
So, thank you, Chair. This is about tweaking the council procedure rules, specifically about questions. So, as it stands at the moment, theoretically, a member of the public or a member of council, these are interchangeable, So for example, a member of the public puts a question into council, and it's put and it's asked, and they get an answer. The wording is as such in the Constitution that theoretically somebody could, a councillor could put an identical word for word, exactly the same question in at the next council meeting, and that would be perfectly valid, even though it's been answered in full at the last council meeting, which is a bit weird and not how the rules were written. They were written to sort of stop that from happening. So what we've done is we've tweaked the wording slightly to make it explicitly clear that if a question that has been asked by anybody cannot then be re-put by somebody within the next 6 months. Okay, and then the other thing that we've also slightly tweaked again is that you'll notice in red where it says validly received or put, because there's another example which is a much more up-to-date example of the last council meeting, where because the wording says put, theoretically again you could have 1, 2, 3 councillors or 3 members of the public all putting in the same question. But because none of those 3 had been put at the meeting, you wouldn't be allowed to reject any of those 3 questions. So hence why you end up with 3 people asking very, very similar questions. So by putting that, it means that if we've received a question, as soon as the first question is in, that is the thing that then allows us to then say no to any more questions on exactly the same subject. It may seem a bit sort of trivial that we're putting this in, but given the massive increase in questions that we've had over the last couple of council meetings, we want to try and make it so that there's enough time for as many people as possible to ask questions. And to be honest, it's not really in anyone's interest to have 3 questions that are exactly the same, or indeed having a question that was asked at the previous meeting, word for word, or even extremely similar being asked at the next meeting. There's a finite amount of time, and we want to try and maximise the number of different and varied questions we can get through. That's it.
Does anybody have any comments to make? Councillor Bayford?
Yeah, just say I totally agree. I think it's very important that this is put in because, you know, the time is limited and it's only fair that people should have a chance to ask a question. It's totally inefficient for it to be repeated, so I'm fully in favour of this. Thank you.
Councillor Crittenden?
Yes, I also, it does make complete sense. The only thing I wanted to ask was, sometimes, as they say, things in politics can move quite fast, and certainly whilst it feels like things in local authorities move slowly, sometimes things suddenly run ahead. I know that very often our ward members are asking us about things that maybe we did have answered 3 months ago, but something's changing or whatever. And I felt that 6 months, if you're going to merge public and councillor questions, I felt that 6 months seemed like a little bit of a long time and would have preferred something like 4 months. And I didn't know whether or not that could be considered, or if anyone else thought the same.
Does anybody else wish to say what Councillor Crittenden's just commented on?
I personally don't agree because...
Every 2 months the meetings, aren't they?
Sorry?
We only have meetings every couple of months.
Yes, quite. We do only have meetings every couple of months, and surely a member of public can receive an explanation of the reason why. I think 6 months is fine.
I think, without commenting on the merits of 4 or 6 months, I think if something changed, then I think that would be significantly different enough. If you said, okay, well, yeah, this question was asked at the last meeting, but actually there's been a material change in what's happened, the house in question's been demolished or something like that, then I think that would allow for that sort of supplementary in inverted commas question.
Anybody else got any observations? Councillor Austin?
Yeah, just wanting to pick up on that we did have a discussion about it, didn't we, at the Constitution Review Working Party? And I was asking about what happens if a member says, no, what I'm asking is different from, and you explained what the process would be and who would look at that and so on.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that, so it's so we as Dem Services officers do a first check of the question, so we make sure it's within the word limit, make sure it's addressed to a cabinet member, all sort of the basic things that are clearly, if they don't follow that process, it's a no, and we write back to the questioner, which I'm sure some of you will have noted in the past and said, terribly sorry, too many words, or you haven't said who it's to. If they pass all those tests, then we pass it on to the monitoring officer, Ingrid, and then she'll look at it and say, yeah, I think that's okay, no problems. We say back, thanks very much, all good, on the list. If we feel that it's not, or it's quite similar, or there's a reason why we might want to reject that, then those go to the chief executive, because in the Constitution, the person who theoretically rejects and approves questions is the chief executive. He will look at it and say, yes, I think that is acceptable, keep it in, or actually, yeah, you know what, I don't think this is too similar to one that's asked before, or it's more often than not, it verges on the frivolous or defamatory type sort of threshold. But even then, even if he does want to reject that question, he still has to talk to the chairman of council to have a conversation with him to say, I'm going to reject this, and at that point the council, as the council chairman, has the chance to put a councillor's point of view into that thought process that the chief exec's having. So there's a lot of steps in that process that are designed to allow as many questions as possible. We're not here there to try and all those stages are not there to sort of be multiple sieves to make sure that stuff gets thrown out. It's the opposite way around.
Just thinking about what you've been saying, I'm thinking back to a meeting where we had, I think, probably at least half a dozen questions on Manston. Some of them were quite similar, some of them were slightly different. A couple were from members of the public, and several were from, obviously, members of the council. Within what you do, is there any way in which you can composite some of those several questions? Or would you have to, I mean, if they're subtly different, would you still let them through, or is there any way you could bring them together? I'm particularly thinking that members of the public don't want, they're the ones I really wouldn't want to leave them out, because they're the ones we're here for. And yeah, thank you.
Compositing questions is not something that I would ever want to do as an officer, because as soon as you do that and you start taking bits and pieces out of other people's questions, people tend to get quite irked by that, and also because they want the opportunity to ask the questions themselves. That's the other thing that we've found, where if you say, well, I'm terribly sorry, you can't ask yours because it's a bit similar, that's just a red rag to a bull, if we're being honest. It's a nice idea, but I think the practicalities of actually doing it are extremely challenging for officers. Because again, if you did that with members, that's then sort of stepping on members' toes and saying, well, actually, I'm not letting you talk to this bit, and I'm going to take that bit out of the question, and actually that might be the really killer political thing that you wanted to hang your supplementary question. And then again, you get into, if you've composited two questions together, who gets the supplementary question? Are you allowed two supplementary questions? Yeah. That doesn't want to come across as it's really hard, so we're not doing it. But I think there are significant challenges to doing that.
I think it's safe to say that if a question from, especially a member of the public, is rejected along these recommendations, then I'm sure the response from Democratic Services will explain it fully so that the member of the public will understand. Am I right, Mr. Hughes?
Yes, we will. Moving forwards, we will be more specific in the reasons why we've rejected stuff. We can't suggest ways to make things valid, if that makes sense, but we can tell people why something isn't valid. But I think I'll make the same point I did last time, which is that if people put their questions in now for the December council meeting, we've got plenty of time to do that. If they leave it to like half an hour before the deadline, which is often the case, then even with the best will in the world, it's quite a challenge for us to be able to give detailed advice on that shorter timescale.
Councillor Austin, did you?
I just wanted to pick up, we had the same discussion, didn't we, or a similar discussion at Constitutional Review Working Party, because I was saying, well, couldn't you just say, Councillor X, you might want to talk to Councillor Y, who has already done, but Nick said he felt that would be treading on the toes of members' responsibilities and not an appropriate thing for an officer to be doing, and I get that.
Councillor Crichton, are you wishing to make a proposal to amend the recommendation?
I don't want to make any recommendation to amend it, but I just felt it would be useful to just have a discussion on those things. Obviously, I'm not in CWRP, so it's just those were the things that concern me. And we did have that rather bizarre situation where we had sort of like about 6 or whatever it was questions on one subject, and they were all subtly different. But the answers got very repetitive because that's the way it was, so we just have to carry on and work it out as best we can. But thank you for your answers.
Thank you. I think what I can do, can I read out the recommendations first before we ask for a seconder and a proposer? The recommendations are to amend Part 4 Rules of Procedure paragraph 13.5 of the Council's Constitution to read, the Chief Executive will reject a question if it is substantially the same as a question which has been validly received or put at a meeting of the council in the past 6 months by either a councillor or a member of the public, to amend Part 4 Rules of Procedure paragraph 14.6 of the council's constitution to read, a question will not be substantially the same as a question which has been validly received or put at a meeting of the council in the past 6 months by either a councillor or a member of the public. Could I have a proposer for the recommendations, please? Statistics of the current complaints. Does anybody want to raise any comments about them? Councillor Crittenden?
Only just to say that the very last item says no further action, but it's still open.
I think that's because the letters haven't been written. I think, is that? Yeah. So yes, so the subcommittee, the Standard Assessment Subcommittee has met. It's decided that it's no further action, but we're still in the process of sending all of the paperwork out. So slightly oddly, it is no further action and still open at the same time. But will be closed very soon.
I think that's probably...
I think to add that probably all the letters are just done, but post the report being concluded.
And you've got the changeover between the 2 monitoring officers, and I know Gabriella's not been well, so that could also be another valid reason for the delay. Councillor Bayford.
I've noticed that when there is a complaint against a councillor and there is no further action, it can take a very long time for that councillor to be told that's the case, which I think is unfortunate because it can be quite worrying.
Mr. Hughes, would you like to comment, or Ingrid?
Well, really just to note that's the case, and I think my commitment is certainly to process those complaints as speedily as possible, but obviously sometimes evidence needs to be gathered and the councillor needs a chance to respond, so there is a process to go through, and sometimes unfortunately that can be time, that can take more time than one would hope, but certainly totally recognise that can be a really stressful process, and obviously councillors, it's open to councillors to contact the independent person for support, and but I recognise what you're saying, and I think it's really important that insofar as we can process as speedily as possible that we commit to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think that's important because I know that I thought that once something had come to standards and no further action was recommended, it would be immediate that councillor was informed.
I mean, I totally take that on board. I don't, in this recent complaint, I can't comment except to say that obviously there has been a change in monitoring officer. But my understanding is that all of those letters are now up to date as of the end of last week. So I suspect that those kind of were sent out just after that report was concluded. But totally take on board what you're saying. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Is it possible that if no further actions agreed, could a phone call not be made to the person concerned and explain to them that formal notice will be followed up by a letter in due course to take away the worry?
Chair, there's no reason why that can't happen. Sometimes it's really useful to set out, if it's a complex complaint, it's really useful to set out full reasons. Obviously, but certainly I think if there's going to be a delay in the letter, that I take that on board.
And then just a preliminary phone call and then say the formal letter will be made.
Yeah, there's no reason why that can't happen, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Austin.
I just wanted to ask, as a new member of this committee, what did not meet the jurisdiction test exactly means, please?
So when a complaint is submitted by a member of the public or another councillor, we do what is, or sorry, we don't, the monitoring officer does what's called the jurisdiction test. So that is a series of questions that the monitoring officer asks of the complaint, effectively. So that is, did it happen within our timescales? If it didn't, doesn't make it a complaint. The other one is, if this matter that had been brought to the attention was true, would it be a breach of the code? If not, then again, it just dies, and that is a jurisdiction not met. They're the two most common ones, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Nick, thank you. But the other one, of course, is whether the councillor was acting in... Yeah, exactly that, yeah.
And I think that brings the meeting to a close. However, there's just one other question I want to raise, which was raised at the meeting a year ago. We dealt with an assessment where we had a media policy, and it was agreed that that Shamira would look at the rewriting of the media policy to differentiate, so that when people have got Facebook accounts, unfortunately some councillors are putting Councillor Joe Bloggs, so the public are thinking it's come from him. But when he leaves his name off and just puts Joe Bloggs, some members of the public still think it's coming from a person who is a councillor and not just a normal member of Facebook, TikTok or whatever. And I think that all needs to be clarified. And I know it needs some work with, as Nick and I were discussing earlier, with communications. So whether we can look at, try to strengthen that policy, because it is a nasty one.
Happy to pick that up as well, Chair. I mean, I think it's a really important thing to get right, and it's something that some councillors really struggle with. It's tricky, and also public perception is, you know, it's really important to get that right. So I don't know where Samira got to with it, but I'm very happy to pick it up.
Thank you. Anybody else got any comments before we close the meeting? In that case, close the meeting closed. Thank you all very much for attending.